Africans, especially when it comes to addressing some of these occurrences, addressing the consequences of conflicts in Africa, is the fact that the very countries that have funded most of our processes, post-conflict reconstruction processes and transitional justice processes, are also hardest hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. And most of them are actually experiencing the second wave of the pandemic. Therefore, this raises questions for us as Africans around around the future of the funding of these processes going forward in the post-COVID-19 context. When everyone will be trying to rebuild better and rebuild stronger, what is the outlook for Africa and African processes around addressing some of the consequences of these crises in Africa? Will the US, will the UN, will the West, will the UK, will the European countries be able to fund us going forward? Are there opportunities for us to look at other sources of funding? We are a continent that is rich in natural resources. However, we have not managed so far to leverage some of our rich resources, some of the dividends out of our resources to fund some of our democratic processes and some of the developmental processes in Africa. So today we are really discussing the outlook around these issues. What is the future? What is the outlook of funding of some of these processes in Africa? And taking us through this panel today, we have Ms. Masego Madzwamuse from Southern Africa Trust. We have Mr. Makmeet Kamara from the African Transitional Justice Legacy Fund based in Ghana. I will be introducing them shortly, giving the participants a brief around their expertise and some of their focus areas and their experiences around these issues. We will be joined also shortly by Mr. Brian Kagoro, who is a Pan-Africanist and currently with the Open Society Foundation's Africa Regional Office based in Kenya. I also would like to welcome all our participants to also use some of the chat function and the question and answer function to pose their questions, their reflections and comments on this important topic. Now introducing our speakers. Please bear with me as I just open up my slide. It just closed now. Taking us through today's session, our speakers, I'll start with Mr. Makmeet Kamara. Mr. Makmeet Kamara is a human rights leader, researcher, and development communications practitioner with experience working with national and international development and human rights organizations in Africa and the United Kingdom. He's the director of the Africa Transitional Justice Legacy Fund, a grant-making institution based in Ghana and covering 7 countries in West Africa. Prior to joining the African Transitional Justice Legacy Fund, Mr. Kamara worked at the International Secretariat of Amnesty International in London as Deputy Director of Global Issues and Acting Head of the Economic, Social and Cultural Rights Team, Interim Director of Amnesty International Nigeria and West Africa Researcher with Amnesty International. Ms. Masego Madzwamuse is the Chief Executive Officer of the Southern Africa Trust. She is a social justice activist and practitioner in the development and economic space, bringing over 20 years of extensive experience working with civil society, community foundations, and non-profit sector. She specializes in natural resource management, adaptation to climate change, land tenure security, sustainable development and management, gender and social policy development, amongst other disciplines. She has contributed to numerous thought pieces, research papers, and conversations on high relevant global and regional topics. She's a trusted voice in the industry, leading the development, implementation, and monitoring of programs and projects within Africa and beyond. As a sector leader, Ms. Madzwamuse currently serves as a member on the boards of the African Philanthropy Network, Semoyo Institute of Agrarian Studies, and Growth Leaders. I will introduce Mr. Brian Kagoro the minute he joins us, but taking us forward in this discussion, as I have given a brief context. Thank you, Mr. Kagoro. Thank you for joining us. Introducing Mr. Kagoro as he's just joined us, Mr. Brian Tamuka Kagoro is the Africa Program Director of Open Society Foundation's Africa Regional Office. Brian is a founder and executive director of Uhai Africa Group, a pan-African governance, leadership, and development consulting firm with operations in Johannesburg and Harare. Brian is a constitutional and international economic relations lawyer with extensive regional and global experience. Brian was the Regional Governance and Public Administration Program Advisor for UNDP and also UNDP's governance team leader for the Africa region within UNDP Regional Service Center for Africa in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. This was during 2011 to 2014. He served also as the Pan-African Head of Policy and Advocacy at Action International between 2005 and 2010. And before that, he was a law partner in a leading law firm in Zimbabwe. Mr. Kagoro, welcome to this panel. Now, taking us further, I just painted a picture in the beginning about the number of crises, the multiple crises that Africa is currently experiencing, and also some of these being exacerbated by COVID-19. And the fact that most of the funders of our developmental processes and transitional justice processes, as well as post-conflict reconstruction processes, are currently grappling with COVID-19 and are hardest hit, currently experiencing the second wave of COVID-19. In these occurrences and in light of the pandemic and going into the post context, what is the outlook of development processes in the future? Is there going to be a change, especially in light of the current situation and the current context? Are we to expect something different? Will there still be funding for African development processes going forward? You are coming from funding institutions, philanthropic institutions. Some of the institutions that are funding most of these processes are the organizations that you work for or that you are affiliated with. So from your experiences, can you draw a picture for us on what some of these experiences mean for the future of funding for justice in Africa? We will start with you, Mr. Kagoro.
I thought that someone else would start. Can I reframe the question? And let me reframe it this way, that in imagining...
Please go ahead, Mr. Kagoro.
Yeah, yes. in imagining TJ in the major factors that we're witnessing, which are pivots in the global economy, whether it's pivots in the you're getting pivots in terms of what you're seeing in the what do you call this, the social entrepreneurship pivot, or the virtual, moving to virtual working, the greater use of technology for violations, as well as the pivot that you are seeing in terms of the new forms of violent extremism that are high tech, and what you are seeing in terms of citizen responses to states and the delegitimization of the state. In the sense that I think a speaker yesterday said, we have always imagined TJ and insisted the centrality of the state in reaching the resolution. The levels of contestation around the state raise fundamental issues, the transnational nature of violations. So if you are sitting in the Sahel, a collective grievance held by the Fulani people who cut across more than one jurisdiction becomes important. So who funds and how do you fund? The general approach to TJ work has been funding towards memory, funding towards hearings, where perpetrators and victims are confined mostly within the nation state, and they are largely either belligerents or others. The general funding has also gone towards psychosocial support, and that psychosocial support being targeted specifically at a finite group of people, and the violation being determined. And also the transnational nature of violations, which is violations by states other than African states or states in collaboration with African states, as well as violations by multinational corporations who until now have not been part of the TJ conversation, and who have a much, if you like, their capacity to resist, what do you call this? To resist any attempt at holding hearings that will find them guilty. And also the very fact that many of them are not subject to national jurisdictions, because some of the agreements they sign with our government are for matters to be arbitrated in London, in Tokyo, and elsewhere. And these are involved in availing weapons, such as we've seen in Central African Republic. So if you're looking at the Russian firms, the private military firms, if you're looking at South African private military firms in Mozambique, if you're looking just across the length and breadth of the region, it means that the nature of violations and the actors in violations have changed. The victims may still be local, but there's also a reason the transnational victim. It also means that the conduit of funding and the possibilities of funding that are presented by mobile money, that are presented by the ability to transfer money directly to victims, that are presented by virtual forms of working, complicate our understanding of relief, also complicate our understanding of accountability in many fundamental ways. And I think that the funders are often slow to adjust, because the state-centric mode in the pre-COVID era, my concern is not whether there's a reduction or increase in money towards largely the work that you are calling peace and security, and also specifically to the work of justice in instances of transitions. It's not the reduction of money. It is the utility of funding and mechanisms of delivery, and also the shift in the demos or the publics that receive that funding, the lack of organization, disorganization, and also the new forms of organizing. So let me land by saying to you, if you look at what we've seen in Sudan, in Burkina Faso, and Nigeria with End SARS recently, and you ask yourself, when I am dealing with accountability for End SARS, how might I attend to that? I'm not talking about a tribe. So the urban demography have become the new victim of state repression and oppression, and the use of thugs and other types of, if you like, actors also becomes important. So it's clearly both the funder and the TJ practitioner needs to rethink what we are calling transitional justice, and the role both of the state, transnational actors, as well as the role of new forms of money and resourcing. Because I suspect that Masego and people working in philanthropy might become a more appropriate funding mechanisms. I suspect people working on mobile money might become a more appropriate funding mechanism for transitional justice than we have seen before, the historical. And lastly, Anna, the African philanthropist, the African private sector, which is a huge beneficiary of repressive states' policies, and also which in some instances has become a huge opponent of some of the practices and conduct of their own states and other actors, might become a key ally in conceptualizing and reconceptualizing funding. At a global level, because of anti-Black racism, we might end up with a situation where the African entrepreneur, the African philanthropist, the African activist ends up having to lend support to American and European and Latin American activists who are facing a new cycle of violations that will require some form of transitional justice interventions. That's what we're seeing with the rise of militias in the North, in the global North. So globally, conceptions are changing. and the greatest repository of TJ knowledge, which used to sit in America, now sits in Africa. Yet the greatest innovation in TJ funding has not yet shifted. And it's time we shifted and went into a transdisciplinary imagination. And I like this panel because you've brought people working in philanthropy and funding, but also brought people working directly on TJ issues. Thank you. I hope that helps, cast a view in terms of the future, not just in terms of money flows, but the future in terms of reconfiguration of the field entirely and how resourcing is done in the field. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kagoro, for these enlightening reflections. And already, I think through the African Union Transitional Justice Policy, we are seeing this shift already happening where we are bringing a number of disciplines, a number of violations that were not traditionally considered to be transitional justice issues also coming to the fore, coming into the mix because of the experiences we have in Africa. You really raised an important point around reimagining funding and funding streams for transitional justice, and also opening the field, making it transdisciplinary, multidisciplinary, bringing in other occurrences in Africa, issues of climate change, issues of what we see happening on the ground, addressing this through transitional justice, but also bringing in other key players such as the philanthropies and also some of the private sector actors to the basket of funders for Africa's development, Africa's post-reconstruction processes, and Africa's transitional justice and processes that aim to achieve a sustainable peace on the continent. I will come next to you, Mr. Makmeet, in this reimagination, and also because you're coming from one of the institutions that actually do a lot of philanthropy work, transitional justice work, and also being linked to specific foundations that fund some of this work on the continent. What is your outlook around the future of funding, financing, reimagining sources of funds, sources of resourcing for transitional justice and other processes that take us forward towards achieving sustainable peace on the continent?
Thank you very much, Anna, and thank you very much, CSVR, for this invitation and for this convening. And we really appreciate the opportunity to participate and share our experiences and ideas with other panelists, but also other members of the TJ community in and outside Africa. And, you know, Brian made a number of points that actually speak to some of the points that I want to build on. And but perhaps just before I get into that, just to provide some context from where I'm coming from, with a bit of an introduction of the Africa Transitional Justice Legacy Fund, for those who might not know. The fund, just under 3 years, it was established by MacArthur Foundation and another US-based private foundation to provide support for community-based organizations or survivor groups that are supporting state-led interventions to advance transitional justice in Africa, but starting with 7 countries within West Africa. We are currently establishing alliances and partnerships with established institutions and regional blocs and regional bodies like the African Union Commission through AU Department of Political Affairs, also through ECOWAS, and then working very closely with CSVR and other partners to ensure that some of the existing gains on TJ interventions and efforts are consolidated, and then we build on those gains to reach out to previously unreached voices and survivors. Now, in terms of the outlook, I totally agree with Brian that the conversation perhaps, or the discourse should perhaps be shifting, not necessarily from the amount of money that we should be expecting from external sources, but to how we can harness what we already have within the continent, within the societies that have been affected. And by harnessing the resources, I'm not talking about necessarily financial resources. I'm also talking about the human resources, the ideas, the innovation that is inherent within the spaces, within these societies that have been affected by conflicts, but have also been affected by dictatorships. And as you know, some of the countries we are working in as the fund are not necessarily coming from conflicts. We have countries like the Gambia that are emerging from 22 years of dictatorship of the Jammeh regime. So the dynamics there is different. We have, we're dealing with countries like Guinea that had a political transition situation that is also still experiencing the same problem. Just a few days ago, over 24 people were killed by the states from various reports for contesting, for challenging the current government, for changing the constitution, and for what they think was a rigging of the elections there. So the situation in Guinea from 10 years ago has not changed. You know, the victims who were massacred at the stadium are still waiting for their reparation. They're still waiting for justice. Now, before COVID and before the current escalation of violence and crises and tensions within Africa, funding streams have already been drying up. You know, for those of us who were in the sector, even before moving to the philanthropy, those of us who were in the front line, if I could say, working in the field, doing human rights research, engaging with victims and survivors to demand justice and accountability, there was already inertia, there was already that of funding for hardcore human rights issues and transitional justice issues. In fact, transitional justice, as in the past 5 to 10 years, has been going down the bottom of the rung for a number of donors. A number of donors were shifting their attention to other issues. And we see that when, as funders, we issue calls for proposal. And we see organizations or institutions that you would not ordinarily expect to apply for funding, apply for the kind of funding that we are providing, even though we are very clear that our funding is for small community-based organizations and survivor groups. So it is bleak when you look at it from the perspective of international funding support to TJ issues and TJ interventions in Africa. The prospects are not promising. A lot of the big foundations, a lot of the big donors are moving away to other things. They're moving their attention to other things. And that is creating a lot of competition between and among civil society organizations and groups who want to continue intervening and working to advance transitional justice issues in conflict areas or in post-conflict societies. There's a lot of tension, there's a lot of fighting for the limited resources that is available. And then COVID came. COVID provided a perfect rationale for those funders who were already thinking of shifting attention to shift completely their focus to other things. And as we speak, you see a lot of calls for proposals with specific requirements that your funding application has to have indications of how you can address COVID-related issues. And this is creating the same problem that development institutions and development organizations experienced in the years past, where a lot of organizations were just moving from one development agenda to the other because that is what the donors wanted. That is what the donors were asking for. We're seeing that, and in my view, it is even worse for transitional justice interventions because transitional justice funding has been comparatively low in the ladder of funding supports coming from the big foundations and the big donors outside of Africa. But one thing that has also provided a very positive outlook for funding, not just transitional justice work, but peace building, community development, is the level of innovation and the ability of survivors to use the concept of solidarity to help each other. And we have examples of various mechanisms that have emerged, various initiatives that have emerged within the continent that has been given opportunity for people to show solidarity, not just by hashtags, but by direct intervention and support. We have seen initiatives that have been developed within the continent, which has given people an opportunity to take direct action that goes beyond the click of the laptop button. One example that I could give is the Survivor Solidarity Fund that was initiated and created in Sierra Leone for victims of rape and gender-based violence. Now, within the period of 1 month, when there was so much outcry following the alleged rape and killing of a 5-year-old girl in Sierra Leone, we had civil society actors, ordinary people, individual philanthropists coming together to raise funds to not just provide psychosocial support or medical support, but legal intervention, direct legal intervention for victims of rape and other forms of sexual violence. And within a very short space, we were able to see this group of Sierra Leoneans raising over $109,000. This was unprecedented in the history of fundraising by a movement of people. Now, no, this group of men, women, and others did not do it or did not wait to write a proposal. They did not have to wait for a call for proposal to raise money for direct intervention. They were able to raise $100,000 by donation using social media, using direct outreach, using WhatsApp to send flyers and our traditional radios, community radios. Firstly, to cause the outrage. You know, people were outraged by the act of what happened, and because of that outrage, they were able to not wait for outside intervention. They raised the money. They raised over $100,000 to intervene without waiting for government or without waiting for any foundation to tell them to develop a log frame. That is one example. And for me, that is the kind of thing that we will be seeing going forward within the continent, where people are taking actions, taking the fundraising action beyond the log frame and conceptualization. Africans are going to be taking steps to uplift themselves from whatever kind of fraternity that is currently, funding fraternity that currently exists within the global sphere, to respond to mass atrocities, to respond to issues of mass human rights violations and abuse within their societies. Another thing that we are seeing that would be perhaps you can consider as an outlook is the dismantling of these funding fraternities. I mentioned at the start that my fund is supported or was established and created by a basket support for MacArthur Foundation and another US-based private foundation. Now, we've seen these models being done in a number of other initiatives. Going forward, some of these fraternities, what I would call funding fraternities, will be dismantled, not because they want to, but because they are being forced to do so by the people who need the support. People are taking up the outrage of the lack of interest that is being shown by those who ought to, or by those who claim to be doing it and taking the action by themselves. I want to pick on what Brian mentioned about Africans giving support to Western activists and survivors going forward in a way that will show solidarity. I would definitely not be surprised, because we have seen situations where diasporic support, in the past, we used to get a lot of diasporic support from Africans based in the diaspora, sending money for primarily humanitarian assistance. What we will see going forward is a reimagining, a reconfiguration of that diasporic support, where people will feel so outraged and so empowered to provide support to their counterparts and their compatriots in other parts of the world without waiting for the kind of the usual suspect that we are used to seeing mobilizing this kind of intervention. So in a nutshell, the things that I see as the potential outlook going forward for funding will be the use of technology and the emergence of solidarity within communities and within societies that have been affected. And this solidarity goes beyond collection of money. It actually includes the use of ideas, people coming together, sharing ideas to counter and to shift the power. So those issues are what we'll be saying. And we will also see a situation finally where the institutional egos that we have been used to, the institutional egos of big foundations will be challenged, and because their basis will be threatened, their foundations will be threatened, and we will see partnerships and collaboration between South-South alliances. We will see solidarity and collaboration that goes beyond the usual boundaries that we are used to. These are the outlooks that we see. Although the funding outlook from big donors is bleak, there is huge potential for grassroots fundraising and solidarity within the continent.
Thank you, Mahmoud. Indeed, you raised very important points, also building onto what Brian raised earlier. Again, you're bringing the issue of non-transitional justice, non-traditional TJ actors also coming forward, solidarity networks between victim groups and other actors in communities also coming together, the diaspora funding some of the developmental issues in their countries of origin, and also some of these processes happening organically as people respond to issues as opposed to national-led or state-led, state-centric transitional justice processes. And coming to you, Masego, before we go to the to fielding some of the questions from the floor, an issue has been raised, some reimagining has raised the important issue of tackling some of these issues, development in Africa, post-conflict reconstruction processes in Africa, from a point of view or from an issue-based and issue-led interventions and processes, as opposed to state-centric, state-led and state-propelled formal processes of transitional justice, where people galvanize and come together around responding to specific issues and challenges coming up in their communities. And in so doing, they contribute to a larger goal of rebuilding societies, achieving long-term sustainable peace, or addressing some of the root causes of conflict. And this is some of the work that you do in the Southern Africa Trust, responding to some of the issues around poverty, inequality, climate change as they emerge, and also ensuring that communities' livelihoods are sustained this way. However, this work all in a larger frame, in a larger goal, contributes towards transitional justice goals, of achieving sustainable peace. What is your outlook from the work that you are doing around the future of some of these processes? They are innovative, they are groundbreaking, and some of the work really is at a macro level, at a community level, but it contributes to the larger goals that sort of also contribute to nation building, that also contribute to peace at a national, regional, and continental levels. What is the outlook from the work that you are doing around financing and the future of some of these processes?
Anna, thanks. I think I want to start at a macro level, because if I start with the innovations that are being led from a community initiative, it is actually to take away the responsibility from where the source of funding ought to be. I think that and my colleagues Brian and Mahmoud have made reference to this as well. that I think that in terms of the future of the outlook for funding for transitional justice, it has to be structured, and we have to be having conversations in a way that pays homage to us understanding the link between transitional justice and the roles that socioeconomic inequalities play in fueling conflict and undermining peace and security in our continent. And it also has to be done in a way that the conversations we're having about the source of funding, the nature of it, the dynamics and the interactions, also has to pay homage to us understanding the history of our conflicts and bringing to the fore the questions of distributional justice and historical redress as an issue that is a continuation of conversations that we've had in the past. I worry when we immediately go into what can communities do and what can governments do, because in that process, the very sponsors of our insecurity are let off scot-free. So a starting point for me is in understanding what is happening within the international space of funding peace and peace building work. And based again on our own experiences of the pots of funding that we've had to rely on to support the work in the region, the bulk of it being ODA funding. What we're seeing is that ODA itself is under budget pressure. And I will give an example of just what is happening around the UK aid as an illustrative example. UK aid through DFID has been one of the major funders that we've had in the past 15 years to support the robust work that we've been doing with partners such as Accord and others on the ground around peace and security. But through a 10-year time period, DFID itself is facing pressures in their budget and demands from a domestic point of view, and we have seen a direct decline in the level of funding that is that then comes towards that work. What replaces it is funding that is provided by philanthropists, and I'll come back to that. At the ODA level, and I think Magmeet began to point this out on the impact that the dwindling on funding has had, one, on the mission-driven approaches that actors on the field have, but also just on the availability of resources. We're seeing that in terms of external private finance flows that come from the OECD in 2020 alone under COVID pressure, but there's been a significant decrease of funding, which has led to levels that far exceed what we were seeing with the financial crisis in 2008 by almost 60%, right? So we have a drop of flow that is coming from traditional, through the traditional aid streams. But what we are also seeing is that the level of funds, again, that come to the continent is going down. I think I've already covered this. And we are getting, like, over the last decade, the data that has been before us has been showing that only 25% of funds that are available globally are coming to the continent. And there's a question there around the diversity of the source of funding, including diversity in terms of where that funding is destined. One major global player is quite influential in this space, and is the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And we know that the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation does not provide significant funding to transitional justice issues. And within the broader funding, the bulk of it goes to the education sector. And again, when we look at how much actually trickles down to local institutions, the INGOs in the space get the bulk of the money. So what is happening is the innovative work that you've been talking about, that you referred to, which we work on with community foundations, is having to do with very, very little. And in the context of competing demands. In one of your questions, and again, in thinking through whether the face of funding in this space is going to change, has always been the question around the potential for domestic resource mobilization. And this is one thing I haven't had been mentioned in this particular panel, is yes, there is theoretically potential for domestic resource mobilization through our tax regimes, but we can't do this unless we attend to the issues of illicit financial flows in our continent. Right? The latest figures are that we're losing 88 billion a year to financial aid. And when our AU envoys went on a fundraising drive for COVID responses, some of which may address the conflict issues, they were only able to raise 30 billion. So were we chasing the right money? Shouldn't it have been the 88 billion that we were looking at? So in our outlook of how we're thinking about the future of funding for this work, are we looking at the right places? I want to and I'll come back to this. I also want to come back to the issue and an agenda that I don't see surfacing much when we talk about financing. And this is the question of reparations. And when I link reparations to transitional justice, it brings me right into what is happening around the space of climate finance and how we think of climate finance as reparation, particularly if we understand the conflict between the link between the impacts of climate change on migration, on conflict, and also on undermining peace and security. Just to wrap it up is to give an example that, for instance, climate finance is the continent. I think this is almost a mantra that we can say in our sleep, that although Africa is not responsible for climate change, we get to live with the brunt of the impacts of climate change. And the priorities around climate financing actually shows clearly that there is a lack of a political will in addressing this. The challenge for climate finance is to raise at least 100 billion per year. The target was to try and raise 100 billion by this year, by 2020. And so far, only 10% has been raised. And you can ask yourself the question, why? It's a question of whose agenda is it, right? Whose security is at stake? And who has the power in the spaces within the climate policy space? If you compare that to the kind of responses that we saw around COVID, when everybody suddenly realized that nobody's safe until we're all safe, we saw the OECD countries, European countries mobilizing funds at a level that we had never imagined just to respond to their national agendas. Germany was able to mobilize $150 billion just for its economic recovery, its economic recovery plan. And when we look at how much could be raised for assistance to the African continents, for the African countries in the continent, we're only looking at a drop in the ocean. So Anna, just to wrap up and say, for me, the conversation isn't so much what can communities do and what can our countries do. It is a conversation about how do we ensure that inequality, addressing inequality, is maintained as an ethos for how we look at funding for transitional justice and who picks up the bill. You're on mute, Anna.
Thank you, Masego, for bringing yet again another layer to the issue of funding of these processes in Africa. You raised an important issue of looking at it from the perspective, even issues of climate change, issues of inequality from the perspective of reparations, because again, as you rightly say, Africa is bearing the brunt of climate change, yet they are not the cause of climate change. And again, seeing how dependent we are on aid coming from outside and how some of these sources are dwindling, taking us back to what Brian alluded to earlier, that we need to reimagine the sources of funds or sources, new resource streams for the work that is being done. And we need to reimagine from a point of view of also holding some of the perpetrators who have not been traditionally included in the group of perpetrators, the multinational corporations, for some of the atrocities on the continent. And again, you bring again the issue of also holding some of these towards also ensuring that they pay homage to some of the damage, long-standing damage that has been caused on the continent that is fueling climate change and some of the challenges that we're experiencing on the continent. There has been some interesting questions that have been asked on the group. One of the questions is around the issue of multinational corporations that has been discussed. That was discussed by Brian earlier. I will just go through just a few of the questions and come back to you to answer some of them and offer some of your reflections. Moses Opio is asking, who can transitional justice process be supported during the lockdown of COVID-19? How can transitional justice process be supported during the lockdown of COVID-19 era? Another question is around the fact that most of the funding opportunities are very competitive and local community organizations hardly meet up with the funding requirements, and they operate in grassroots communities where most of the violations are alarming. Many supporters online do donate to only big or established organizations in the urban areas. How can local organizations catch up with the high demands for justice in the grassroots communities? There was another question that was raised around multinational corporations, how we can hold them accountable and how we can come up with a model around holding them accountable, especially towards funding some of the processes on the continent. Through the work of Khulumani and the South African Coalition of Transitional Justice, there was an attempt that was made a few years ago to approach some of the multinational corporations that were active, that contributed to the apartheid era violations in South Africa, that funded some of the government-led atrocities in South Africa. We saw Khulumani and other civil society organizations going as far as New York to try and litigate around these issues, holding some of the multinational corporations, including IBM, responsible for the atrocities, apartheid atrocities in South Africa. This was not successful, but it took us on a trajectory where we begin to do exactly what Brian spoke about, remodeling, reimagining funding and funding sources and streams for transitional justice work on the continent. Maybe coming back to you, Brian, around this issue, what will the model for holding multinational corporations look like? For instance, we are seeing efforts by a number of organizations and a number of countries, civil society organizations leading some of these processes. Kenya, for instance, led a process of holding the United Kingdom responsible for some of the Mau Mau atrocities in Kenya in the colonial era. We are seeing also Namibia, also the Herero community trying to hold the German government responsible for the Herero genocide in Namibia, asking for reparations and apology and so forth. But what does the model of holding multinational corporations look like if we are to go through this route, if we are to reimagine and extend the network of funders of African processes to these multinational corporations that are active in Africa and fueling some of the conflicts and some of the tensions that we see on the continent?
Thank you, Anna. A few days ago, Pompeo, the US Secretary of State, announced that Sudan would make, what do you call this, compensation. There was no court judgment But Sudan was to pay 330 million to America for the victims of the 1998 bombing. Many of us who have been working on the reparations work started asking, why is there no self-belief and self-confidence amongst African civil society actors and some African governments and academics to demand reparations for slavery, reparations for colonialism, reparations for apartheid, and reparations for the Cold War, and use the American precedent of the 1998 bombing? Why is the African Union, the Pan-African Parliament, why are the so-called radical CSO actors not taking this subject up? If you are Angolan, some of the amputees from the Angolan war that was American sponsors are walking around with disabilities for life simply because America wanted to stop communism and it could do it at any cost. If you are Congolese, the last Congolese person or family that was kept in a cage for the amusement of Belgium was in 1958. And that's within our lifetime. It seems to me that we have de-radicalized our narrative on TJ and over-localized it. That's why I liked both what Masego and Maknit were saying. That let's start, and Masego has raised the one dimension around illicit financial flows, but and then she started talking about reparations in the context of climate change justice. We need to be talking about reparations in a holistic sense. Apartheid only ended in 1994. I suspect most of the people on this panel were already born at the time, right? And it's not a court of law matter. It has to be litigated on the streets. It has to be litigated by conscious communities. It has, until we ourselves actually do say our lives matter, right? And that it's not only, it's 3 people that got 330 million from Sudan that requires that money for development. And I'm not saying that I condone any act of terrorism. I'm simply saying, if that is what white life is worth, how much are our lives worth? And until Africans begin to problematize that issue, we have a problem. Number 2, you see, people worry about lockdown and an inability to act in communities. My own sense is the bigger problem has really been around e-justice. E-justice assumes that e-governance and e-government works, that our state structures are able to operate virtually as they are analog. And that part of our communities' access to technology should be to enable them to use that technology for liberation and not just for consumerism. There is a work to be done by CSOs around the radical. When I'm talking about a multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary approach to TJ, I'm essentially asking us not to think in the narrow confines of what TJ was and asking ourselves the interconnectedness of life, right? The same communities that are victims of climate change are the same communities that are victims of other factors, and the same communities that have also poor access to technology, right? And because the infrastructure is poor. But if we improved that, if we looked at ways, of actually enabling our communities to virtually engage in struggle and in articulation, and the virtual platforms enable a quicker recording of the physical, psychological, economic, and other violations that people suffer. I just wanted to say to the people who are on this call that given the modern challenge that we face, is that the victim is still rural, but we have a shift towards urban victims as a result of the urban revolutions that we are seeing. And because of the shift towards urban victims, the use of technology might be easy, but the collation and collection of evidence much more difficult in terms of tracing, tracking, and so on and so forth. So I would like, Anna, for us to discuss e-justice and e-governance as a critical component, because it's an operational issue, right? But it's one that very few of our governments can tick a box on. The second is the gender and generational dimensions. The TJ, as we know it now, was very poor in dealing with issues of sexual and gender-based violence. When lockdowns happened, the figures for sexual and gender-based violence spiked up, but the capacity of our investigatory and prosecutorial arms to deal with this remained fairly low, partly because we have to wait for the woman to go to a police station, to go to a doctor, and she can't go because there's a curfew or there are limitations. And this is why the issue of e-justice, the issue needs to be reimagined in a fundamental sense, especially for communities that are poor, and the inequality issue that Masego talked about. Now, for multinational corporations, I think there are two ways to hold them accountable. Insisting that our government stop signing investment deals that subject the arbitration or resolution of disputes purely to a foreign jurisdiction. I'm aware that people at SADC Lawyers Association are establishing a SADC arbitration center. We need a West Africa arbitration center, an East Africa arbitration center, West Africa. So you cannot come here and mine. You cannot come here and extract. You cannot come here and make billions and then insist that the law that should apply in the determination of whether you have behaved correctly or not should be the law of your own foreign country. I think that there's a specific advocacy issue that we must take up. And that's when I talk about multidisciplinary. Our concern with human rights is a noble concern, but as colleagues Masego and Mahmoud will tell you, until African civil society takes a keen interest in economics, in political economy, in global political economy, we will see things that are very much fundamental to our ability to achieve justice for Africans as unrelated to our daily work. So we will reduce ourselves to counting the wounds on our people's bodies and miss the gash that's being dug into the future of Africans. And the last point is nothing short of comprehensive state reforms, Anna, will suffice. I think that the African state has had an opportunity because of COVID, and the African civil society and African academy. I think what COVID has given us is a wake-up call. Our dependency on our dependency on the North has literally made us not only lethargic, but has meant that we were unable to respond, waiting for salvation from the empire. So my sense is there is a wake-up call for those of us on this call to rethink how we do TJ, to rethink how we finance it, but also rethink if the global funding systems decide not to fund anything happening in Africa because they are preoccupied with their own misery, how might Africans fund their own justice? And what sort of partnership between entrepreneurs, civil society actors, individual workers, and governments is required? And for me, this is a clarion call for all of us for a rethink. Maybe I have not articulated it well, but if we don't rethink, we will sink, because everything we do will be dependent on developments elsewhere, as opposed to our own innovation and our own consciousness and our own needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Just a follow-up question on that. It's interesting, the issues you raise around arbitration centers and the need for us to sort of approach funding from an ethical and also from a developmental point of view, and especially with the rise of China also now coming into the space, funding some of the development in Africa, but at the same time also occupying Africa. Can we as African nations can we afford to have an ethical stance and to negotiate from an ethical point of view and a developmental point of view, and negotiate on some of these deals that are being signed by our governments? Can we afford to actually take this stance?
Yeah, Anna, at least the three of us that you brought on this panel, we share something historically. Mm-hmm. We have in our lives rejected the false consciousness that suggests that a single issue approach to development will solve the enormity of Africa's development problems. That the particularization of a problem as a single nation state, whether China or America, is necessarily correct in analysis. Mm-hmm. Let me explain. Mm-hmm. You see, global power shifted a while ago from the control of states to controls of oligopolies and monopolies. And this is why the same club of billionaires that cause problems in the world have come back and they are suggesting they can solve the problems using the same methods that they made their money with, right? So if we miss the big pharmaceuticals, big tech, big banking, big financial. So whilst yes, China and America and UK remain issues, I think that we should, as Africans, really be paying more attention to the oligopolies and monopolies, because the CEOs of these big oligopolies have more power than the presidents of any nation state, Western or African. Mm. And they're able to influence agricultural policy. They'll come in and say, well, this is what will happen. They're able to influence technology policy, right? They're able to influence. That's why my opening line was, if you are thinking about TJ, the transnational cooperation, and in particular the oligopolies and monopolies, which are not subject to national jurisdiction. They are not even subject to bilateral agreements, so that we say we'll exit the agreement, right? There are no retaliatory sanctions against them. And this requires a movement of African people that are conscious, a movement of African people that begin to say, we cannot ourselves be captured by big money, right? And I like what Masego said, if you accept money, you accept it as part of their reparations for the harm they have caused, and not as an edict for you to show eternal gratitude, right? So if we don't engage in that struggle, Anna, we will be taken on a false goose chase, right? Because if you look at the structure of the companies, so some companies are called Chinese because there's a Chinese person who's fronting it. But if you look at the investment structure, so TJ practitioners must take an interest on who is on the Joburg Stock Exchange, who's on the Nairobi Stock Exchange, who's on the Kigali Stock Exchange, who's on the Harare Stock Exchange and Victoria Falls, and who are the beneficial owners, because it's no longer ownership by a single state, a single nation. And beyond China, man, we've got Taiwan, we've got Turkey, we've got Israel, we've got Africa has become a banana takeaway shop for anybody and everybody who has trinkets to give. And that's why I think in talking about TJ and violations, it's useful for us, yes, to have that state-centric analysis, but also it's useful. That's why multidisciplinary works, because we bring people who will be able to help us analyze things that perhaps in the traditional human rights circuit, we've not been able to look at. But beyond the capacity to do the analysis, we need the courage of articulation. What I've found that is we have greater courage telling our local dictators what wrong they've done. But when it comes to the Americans, the British, the EU, and everybody else, we wither away, partly because we ourselves have become mortgaged by our funding. So until there's that courage of conviction, I think we are peddling in the same, we're simply a group of complainants and not transformers. And to be transformative in the TJ circle or circuits, we need this courage. And I'm glad that CSVR is taking us towards there through this platform. That courage that begins to say, we're not dealing with one issue. We're not dealing with, it's a complex set of issues that requires us to organize across themes, across disciplines and professions, and also for us to keep our eyes on the money. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Kagoro, for that enlightening reflection. around this important issue. Maseho, coming to you and also building onto some of the issues that you raised around the fact that it's important for us, and building onto what Brian has just indicated, the importance for us to take these issues as reparations, some of the money coming in as reparations, and demanding that reparations happen for some of the issues that we are seeing in Africa that have not been caused by Africans particularly, but Africans are suffering from it. And also considering that our experiences, our victimization and victimhood is in continuum. It cannot be compartmentalized according to issues, be it gender-based violence, climate change, conflict, inequality, poverty, and so forth. It's in a continuum. The victims are the same, and the landscape of suffering is also the same. So we're having this intersectionality of issues on the very same victims, the very same terrains and contexts, for instance. And funders are also increasingly asking for funding proposals or for opportunities that bring in this intersectionality approach to the issues and addressing them from this multidisciplinary, multisectoral, and intersectional perspective. What is your take on some of these issues? How do we go forward? And when we are to look at it from a reparations perspective, and demand that this is reparative justice for some of the colonial era violations, some of the current violations, ongoing violations in Africa, what would be the best practice for this from some of the work, the philanthropic work that you are doing, and some of the work of the trust?
Yeah.
What would be the best model for this?
Thanks for that, Anna. And I like that you are asking me to add on to what Brian says. You had to mute me at some point because I kept going, I couldn't wait to just jump in there. And part of the reason was from the list of, I mean, I like what Brian was saying about the importance of moving from issue-based and actually looking at the questions around who the perpetrators are, who ought to be picking up the bill from a holistic perspective, human rights perspective, as well as economic and social rights. And the groups that he read, I would add to that agribusiness, as well as the fossil fuel industry. And this is why the climate change becomes a very interesting example for how we hit all the notes that Brian spoke about. And just to make the issue concrete, let's take Mozambique, for instance, and what Mozambique had to deal with last year as an aftermath of Cyclone Idai and Cyclone Kenneth. If you think about Mozambique as a foreign direct destination for foreign direct investment, almost every major oil company, fossil fuel oil company, is in Mozambique. In fact, if you think about who is fueling and what is fueling the conflict in the Cabo Delgado area, it's also that fossil fuel industrial complex that is at play. What happened when the government of Mozambique needed to pick up the bill for cleaning up the aftermath of Cyclone Idai? The Mozambican government had to go to the IMF to get a loan, right? They were raising about $118.2 million US for their recovery efforts. Why was that part of their debt instead of reparations? Again, if you actually think about the causes of climate change, the role that the fossil fuel industry plays, the fact that major banks and major fossil fuel companies are in Mozambique, why were they not part of the solution of picking up the bill? I think it's partly has to do with whenever we look to finance, we are looking to the wrong places and we're not having the conversations that we're not having the kinds of conversations that we ought to be having. Thinking outside of the box in terms of what kinds of solutions exist, right? A lot of organizations within the climate justice movement have tried out tribunals. that are, you know, the people's tribunals as part of the ambit of transitional justice, and using those as tools, potential tools for what is the term that you guys use? Truth commissions and truth and reconciliation approaches. Now, the limitation with the people's tribunals is the lack of buy-in and solidarity and ownership by our own African states. So the outcome of those processes become expensive for the social license to operate for the companies, but it does not hit the companies in the pockets as heavily as it potentially could. If we were to look at how fossil fuel companies are fined for the ecological damages, for the negative social footprint that they leave in countries where they're doing business, organizations like the Southern Africa Trust that works very closely with community foundations would not be running around looking for money to finance those efforts. So how we think about unlocking funding, again, has to be connected back to what is it that really structurally drives inequality, instability, and who is being held responsible. I'll stop here, Anna, and I can come back later to answer some of the questions you have around specific innovations. But it's just each time we go to what civil society can do and what citizens can do, I think we're taking away the responsibility from where it needs to be on the funding element.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Masego, for that. And the issue around Mozambique and some of the big players in the conflict in Mozambique, the violent extremism also came out very strongly in the discussions yesterday, and also excitingly, panelists and also the moderator and participants were also highlighting the very same issues that you are raising again, that there are big players that we are not targeting. And again, it is up to the state to fix the challenges, to fix the problem, and sometimes, as you rightly say, borrowing further in order to address the consequences, going out of pocket to address the consequences of a crisis, of a conflict not of their own making. Mahmoud, coming to you around some of the issues that you have raised, again, we are seeing the interlinkages and the coming back to this very same issue of innovation, and also some of the approaches, some of the community-led, community-based approaches that are successful. The Legacy Fund has done a lot of work, and you alluded earlier to some of the solidarity networks, some of the non-traditional TJ actors coming to the fore, addressing the issues. One of the questions that has been asked by one of the participants, Brenda Amito, is how then can funders identify some of these organizations, some of these grassroots organizations doing this excellent work around facilitating reconciliation, social cohesion, achieving peace at a macro level. And you gave examples in your opening remarks around some of the work being done in Sierra Leone, some of the work in Ghana, some of the work by some of the civil society actors at a localized level in Guinea. And I know also that the Legacy Fund actually went out of limb to actually identify some of these actors from the ground, are going to some of the countries at localized levels to find them and encouraging them to apply for funding at the Legacy Fund. Maybe you can shed some more light around that. How can other funders, how can other philanthropies, how can other sources of financing for some of these localized activities go about advertising in courts, and also just publicizing, popularizing some of these approaches, reaching to those grassroots level participants and actors that are doing great work. Brian spoke earlier about the need for e-justice, the need for e-governance in Africa. How can we leverage technology to reach out to some of the people in rural areas, in some of the remote areas that are doing this work, not in the limelight, not blowing their own horn, but doing excellent work that needs to be funded, that is under-resourced, but needs to be elevated, and also needs to be referred to as some of the best practices that can be replicated at a national level and in other contexts in Africa. Mahmoud, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anna. That is a lot of issues to
it is a mouthful indeed.
Address, but I'll try and do my best and be precise. And it's very pleasing to hear what Brian and Masego were saying around business and human rights, multinational corporations. Having worked in that sector, I worked on investigating human rights violations and abuse by Shell, the Shell company, and what they are doing, what they've done and what they continue to do in the Niger Delta of Nigeria, and how that region, before the advent or before the emergence of Boko Haram in the Northeast, the Niger Delta was a center of conflict in Nigeria. Like every single day, there were news and reports of attacks by militants, and we know what happened that even led to the killing by the state of Ken Saro-Wiwa, who was managing this multinational corporation. Again, this is another important element that also has a very negative dimension to the fight against multinational corporations. We've seen in the last year the highest number of human rights defenders who have either been incarcerated, killed, or forcibly disappeared are those who are fighting for environmental rights and justice. That in itself tells you the trajectory of and the role and influence of multinational corporations in fueling and in financing tensions, violence, and conflict across the world. This is not just unique to Africa. If you go to South America, huge number of cases, we see how the states in some places are actually conniving and aiding and abetting big multinational corporations to violate the rights of citizens and subject with impunity. So those anecdotes, Brian and Masego, were really useful and to just show the scale and level of the challenge that we're dealing with, even in the context of transitional justice. Another example I could give was my country, Sierra Leone. When Sierra Leone was raging and going on, many people associated the war or described it as the Blood Diamond War. And that's because of the connections to the Blood Diamond, the use of diamond to not just fuel war, but to bring in external actors and players. We saw the role of Charles Taylor, who was another president of another country, and how he was using the roots, the porous borders that we had between Sierra Leone and Liberia to fuel the activities of the Revolutionary United Front. We are seeing a similar situation in the Central African Republic, where because of the interest in diamonds and other mining and extractives, the war keeps going on, despite the enormous efforts and intervention by local people, by religious leaders to ensure that they bring peace. The multinational companies and the external financial interests is undermining, they're undermining the process. So it is quite a complicated quagmire that really will require a system, a very comprehensive system to deal with this. We have the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, but for those who work on that sector will tell you how that piece of framework is when it comes to holding corporates accountable. Now, going to the question that Brenda has asked, I think there's a lot of examples here that I perhaps could just give a few. The use of collectives, cooperatives. We have been in the continent, we grew up and we've seen the level of impact and the transformational power that cooperatives have when it comes to either agriculture, when it comes to women and mobilization, or when it comes to political mobilization. Now, to what extent have we been using cooperatives in the continent lately? It is one aspect, is one area that has been really declining. And we've seen how in South Africa, cooperatives, women cooperatives have been doing a lot of work to ensure that the issues around rights and what come to the fore. How are we as funders, or how are funders, big donors, engaging cooperatives to ensure that we use some of the innovation, we use some of the approaches and mechanisms that they utilize, not just bring ideas, but to bring resources. And sometimes it's not even about money, it's about the time, it is about the ideas, it is about the methods that we use. Because like Brian said, we're not just trying to expand the discipline of transitional justice in the context of funding. We should seek to expand the discipline of transitional justice in methodology, in approach, in voices. So these are my own take from Brian's call around the multi-dimensional approach to intervening on transitional justice goes and is all inclusive. Resources, ideas, people, voices, agencies, and power. Now, and so for me, that is one example. Another example could be the use of social movements. We are seeing an increasing rise in social movements, and funders are struggling in how we deal with social movements, not just in Africa, across the world. You know, the Black Lives Matter is a social movement. Occupy Wall Street was a social movement. Enough is Enough in Nigeria was a social movement. NSAS is a social movement. How do founders engage with these movements is the kind of challenge that I don't think we've been able to discuss fully and bring up very tangible ideas and responses to. And for me, I think that is one area that is starving of engagement. And that is one area that founders can get innovative ideas, can get out of the box thinking in how we transform and how we influence at the national level, but also at global level. We have seen how movements have been able to, in the case of Nigeria, for instance, you know, the campaign is still going on. But before the campaign, we saw the use of social movements to change a constitutional provision about the age of contesting, not too young to run. It was a whole campaign that had its roots around social movements. The fuel subsidy protest that happened in 2015 in Nigeria was also the result of social movements. But if you engage the people who ended up staying or who ended up taking advantage of what became entities that emerged from this social movement, they will tell you they are struggling with attracting funding and support from the traditional funders, because traditional funders are still struggling to engage and deal with these social movements because they don't operate on log frames. They don't operate on concept notes. They don't operate on having an office and having budget percentages for operational budgets and project budgets. This is not how social movements work. But if you go back to the history of social movements in South America, you will see how they were able to influence political change in Chile, in Peru, in Argentina and other places, how women's rights movements, for instance, in South America, were able to challenge dictators. But funders I haven't seen any very strong empirical write-up or suggestion that provides a roadmap for dealing with social movement, because we are scared to deal with these organic structures. We to take the challenge, to take the risk. So for me, I think that the risk of funders need to be more open. We speak flexibility, but we don't actually act flexibility. And to give you the example that we have undertaken as a fund at ATLF in getting the survivor groups, for instance, the IDP women in Mali. We're dealing with a group in Mali that is made up of internally displaced persons in camps, women in IDP camps who want to engage with the now stalled Mali refugee process. They want to be able to get the women in camps to know what is in the policy, the reparation policy that Mali is putting together. What is how can they contribute to the truth-seeking initiative that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission of Mali was undertaking. Now, you don't get NGOs operating from the camps. You have groups, you have survivor groups. So what we did was to reach out. We went to Mali spoke to a wide array of actors, including other donors. We spoke to government people, we spoke to the UN, we spoke to businesses and individuals, we spoke to journalists and human rights defenders. And then the names came up, the ideas came up, and then we worked with these people to develop their proposal. We also had a very kind of less cumbersome approach to our application, where you don't have to necessarily fill all these forms and ask all these questions. We try to encourage groups to use a very simple and straightforward proposal submission. And for me, I think one of the benefits was to talk with these people bilaterally, engaging people bilaterally and hear from them what they have been doing in the first place and why they need support to scale what they're doing. In Sierra Leone, we are engaging with Fambul Talk. We're supporting Fambul Talk, and I'm sure a lot of people know about Fambul Talk's approach in promoting community-led reconciliation and healing initiatives. Now, those initiatives that were used to help in truth and reconciliation in Sierra Leone are now being used to promote community development that is being led by the state. So the country's national development plan is now being called the People's Development Plan, and they are working with the structures and the systems that Fambul Talk used to promote peace building, to promote reconciliation at community level. They are now using those to promote development. So there are existing structures that could be used. There are approaches that could be used. We have examples in the Gambia that we are working with, for instance, women in leadership and liberation, to reach out to previously unreached audiences, including people who refuse to engage with the Gambia TRRC because they are aligned to Yahya Jammeh. And we're working with this organization to reach out to them and get them to take part in the process. So for me, the simple response would be, reach out as much as possible, even before announcing the call. Because once you announce the call, you get bogged down by the deluge of applications and proposals and people sending requests. And like I said earlier, when we announced our call, even though it was clear that we had a particular demographic for our targets, the big players, almost all the big players working on TJ in the continent applied. That just shows you the scarcity of the funding and the competition that is inherent in the space. And I saw Sylvester Ibe's question as well on the platform about how small organizations can compete with this big organization. It is a very tough space to compete because, again, donors are going for those who have systems, those who have financial statements, those who have audited accounts, those who have structures, who have boards and stuff. It is quite a tough space, but that is why the fund was established to ensure that we shift that paradigm. We go to places that are previously unreached. We speak to people who have been squeezed out of the space and who are working in the periphery. And most times, these are the people who actually do the work. They get sub-granted from those who give the money. The big organizations take the money and they sub-grant these other guys, the small guys on the floor. So there's a lot of work that needs doing, and a little bit of it is being done. I think more players and consistency in the from funders. We should move away from this parachute approach to funding, where you come, put out the water and then move out. Consistency is key. Anna, you're on mute, sorry. Anna, you will have to unmute yourself, please.
Thank you, Mahmoud, for sharing some of these insights and just also moving forward on how also the funding community, both traditional funders and the new emerging sources of funding can actually reach out to the grassroots and make themselves known, and also build the capacity of grassroots to actually compete in this broader community of organizations, societies, movements, also looking for funding for some of the initiatives, the great work that they are doing. Thank you for that. One of the reflections from the floor, I'll just read it as well, quite also echoing the great points that have been raised around reparations and also issues around the multinational corporations. One of the participants has said, Brian raises a great point about reparations. This extends or should extend to the ubiquitous question of debt, which will certainly stifle recovery from COVID-19, shrink the fiscal space for any state-led funding into vital social services that we need as a response to this COVID-19 pandemic. The climate crisis as raised by Masego in Mozambique and the full spectrum of TJ needs in Africa as raised by McMead. The number of African countries that are now heavily indebted and afflicted by unsustainable debt to GDP ratio scenario is growing very fast. It is unclear how much of this debt is actually odious debt. I submit, therefore, that it is vital to broaden the multinational corporations or illicit outflows economic justice debate to include the legacy of burgeoning debt crisis and its impact in Africa in this very age of COVID-19 and climate crisis. Again, bringing together some of the issues that you have raised, and also looking at the time. You have answered most of the questions, actually, even some of the questions that were raised on the platform. I will not go into that, but maybe just to give our speakers just 2 minutes on closing remarks, just on what you foresee as the most immediate actions that Africa should take going forward. Post-COVID-19 context is not far away from us. Actually, we are speaking of 2021 from the African context as being the context of rebuilding better, rebuilding stronger. But for transitional justice, again, we are speaking of reimagining and rethinking, resourcing some of these processes and some of these interventions going forward. So we have a timeline of about 2 months to action some of the concrete recommendations and some of the reflections you have spoken about here around how we reimagine, how we rethink. Maybe just in 2 minutes closing for all our participants, just in the short term, what are the 2 things that you think Africa should start doing now in preparation for the post-COVID-19 funding for transitional justice and post-conflict reconstruction processes for Africa? Just 2 from each of you, drawing from what you have said, that just 2 key takeaways from you. We will start with you, Mr. Kagoro, follow with McMead, and end with Masego.
Well, the first thing that I think we have implied and not said as nakedly is decolonize the TJ discourse. If we don't decolonize it, it will continue to limp along, mass producing victimhood amongst the intellectuals that work on it, the funders that work on it, and the Africans that work on it. The second is to reject this notion that we're building back better. When we cannot build back to a neoliberal past that has led us and left us in this scandalous situation. So our own motto should be building forward, different, because that means a reimagination, and that means tackling, as a colleague said, the question of debt, the question of illicit financial flows, and the other questions of accountability of oligopolies and monopolies and their regulation on the continent. And I dare say, actually, a more creative regulation of philanthropies. Sometimes it would appear that philanthropies operate in the wild, wild west when it comes to Africa. And that's why the growth of a uniquely African philanthropic sector, other than that which is impelled by people who will have benefited immensely from the state or mega billionaires, becomes impossible. I think the middle level is what will deliver salvation. And then, of course, I did say upscale or change course, and I suggested we change course. Without a multidisciplinary approach, and I think we're wasting time. Thank you to the eminent panel, and thank you to CSVR and the African Union for the opportunity to share views.
Thank you so much, Mr. Kagoro, for those key takeaways. Mr. McMead Kamara.
Yes, it's always difficult to come after Brian because has this ability to just say all the clever things and then leave you with nothing. But my final takeaway will be for us to do what Paulo Ferreira called a critical self-reflection. And critical self-reflection will allow us to unpack and decamp the various interventions that we are used to question our approaches, to question our methodologies, to question our biases, and to reignite a model of thought process that will allow thought leaders to emerge in the continent. We have a problem right now in the continent of, we are a leaderless bloc. You look within West Africa, we used to have institutions that people fear, or we used to have systems that people will worry about. Now, we don't seem to have that. We are kind of leaderless, and we have, we are kind of in a way, in a situation where people can do what they want. You know, leaders, political leaders and multinational corporations can do what they want because there is no leadership or there's no framework to hold them accountable as they ought to. Another thing that we also need to do is to incubate the knowledge that we have as a continent. We underestimate the power of community knowledge, the power of homegrown knowledge, which we have, and in my view, is wasted. And until we incubate this, we nurture it and transmit it. So this is our asset as well. It's the asset that we should take advantage of. A lot of us here have gone to other institutions or gone to other parts of the world to transmit that knowledge that we have. Africa is a theater, and we all have the expertise to take part in the operation to give birth to the African Renaissance. Until we take advantage of the knowledge that we have, until we incubate that knowledge, we will continue to be a leaderless continent where thought leadership is frowned upon or is shied, and people don't come forward to produce and promote ideas that will reawaken the consciousness that Brian is talking about, reawaken the enlightenment that is there, sleeping. So I would end there, and for others like us, we will continue to engage. We will continue to reach out to new players. You know, we have new players in the TJ field, like example of the Gambia Wave. They are new. We engage them, we fund them because we know they have the capacity to deliver, and we are pleased with what they are doing. So this is the kind of things that we want people to do: take risk, reach out, and embrace new ideas for the continent to thrive. Thank you very much, CSV. Pleased to be engaged in this kind of conversation, and to the AUDP. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Mr. Kamara. Thank you. Masejo.
Thank you, Anna. Firstly, the beauty of speaking last is I can agree with everything that my colleagues have said before me, and which I do. But just to take us back to the question around funding and my two takeaways or parting shots is really to go back to what I was saying earlier, which is going back to addressing inequality as an ethos of transitional justice. I think that's important for us to keep in mind. And then just back to what the advocacy agenda ought to be in the funding space for the continent, and solidarity between the states and its citizens is really that clarion call for debt cancellation, a clarion call for reparations. And then, of course, addressing the question of illicit financial flows. And we don't stop there. Part of the agenda also has to be around accountability of how those resources are being used once we have reclaimed and unlocked them. Thank you, Anna. Thank you, CSVR, for having me. And thank you to the AU as well for according me the space.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. I will not take away anything from what our presenters have given, and I will not spoil it by trying to summarize. They have summarized their interventions and their reflections excellently. I just want to thank everyone. Thank you to all our participants. A big thanks to our panelists, Ms. Masego Matswamose, Mr. Makmit Kamara, and Mr. Brian Kagoro for the excellent, stellar, insightful reflections on this topic, and also for the innovation that you have brought into it, forcing us to rethink, reimagine, and just find innovation amongst ourselves, and also just to think out of the box, go out of the box when we talk about issues of funding. On that note, without much further ado, I will hand over to Ambassador Salah Hamad to take us further in the closing ceremony of our 4th edition of the Continental Transitional Justice Forum. This was our concluding panel, and again, very insightful, very thought-provoking, and quite reflective around how we can move forward, how we can fund our own processes and our own development as Africans going forward. Mr. Ambassador Hamad, over to you.
Thank you very much, Anna, and through you also I'd like to thank our panelists for an excellent panel discussion that we had. I'm sure our rapporteurs have taken notes of all the comments and all the ideas that have been discussed today, yesterday, and the day before yesterday, and hopefully we will soon see an outcome document that is representing the fruits of the discussions that took place since the beginning of this 4th forum, or 4th edition of this African Transitional Justice Forum. We come to the end of the forum, and now we'll proceed to the closing ceremony. But let me just remind our participants that this activity is an annual activity organized by the African Union Commission with technical support from CSVR. And as we begin planning for next year's forum, we hope to receive some ideas and thoughts on how to begin preparations for the 5th edition of this forum, with God's grace. We thank you again, all participants, for being part of this forum despite your busy schedules, and also would like to thank the technicians and the interpreters for a job well done. And of course, we can't really proceed without thanking colleagues from both the Department of Political Affairs of the African Union Commission and CSVR, the Center for the Studies of Violence and Reconciliation. Now I would like to call on Madame Lufundo Mugabe. She is the Executive Director of the Center of the Studies of Violence and Reconciliation to deliver her remarks. Madame Lufundo, you have the floor, please. Thank you. Is Madame Lufundo around? Sophia, could you advise, please?
Sorry, Ambassador, I was just checking to see if she was not in the attendee room. I don't actually see her.
She's not around?
No.
Is she going to be represented? I understand there's another activity that is taking place.
Yes.
Organized by CSVR, so probably she's busy in that one.
Probably, yes. Anna?
Could you, Anna, then represent her, please?
Thank you, Ambassador. And on behalf of our Executive Director, Ms. Nomfundo Mugabe, I would like to extend our gratitude and our thanks to all the participants of this 4th edition of the African Transitional Justice Forum, which has been well attended with all the challenges of not being able to meet face-to-face due to the COVID-19 pandemic. However, even with online technology, leveraging some of the technological advancements, we have been able to have a much lively, reflective, insightful 3 days of conversations, debates, and reflections on the state of transitional justice in Africa. We have had 4 exciting panels over the last 3 days that have also propelled us forward in terms of how do we move forward, how do we do our work in ways that improve practice and also bring out the innovation and innovative processes to addressing some of the consequences of conflicts, some of the consequences of the crisis, the authoritarian oppression and democratic deficits that we continue to grapple with on the continent. We would like to thank our partners, the Department of Political Affairs of the African Union Commission, for working with us as a civil society organization in bringing this Continental Transitional Justice Forum to the fore and making it a success. This is the 4th in a series of annual convenings, as Ambassador you have indicated before. And again, this would not have been possible without the partnership that we have with the African Union Commission's Department of Political Affairs. We are thankful, we are grateful to all for your participation, your engagement, your reflections, your sharing of your own experiences during this panel. On this note, would like to say thank you from CSVR. And again, I'm acting on behalf of my Executive Director, Nomfundo Mohapi, who is also on another panel in another engagement that CSVR is hosting today. Thank you. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Anna, for your kind words. And certainly we value the partnership that we enjoy with your institution as the Department of Political Affairs, which has reached a very mature level, and we count on this partnership and also the support from other members of your network to proceed with preparations for the 5th edition in 2021 with God grace. Let me now call on Mr. Mbari Calix, who will be representing the Commissioner for Political Affairs to deliver his closing remarks. Unfortunately, the director is currently engaged with the election that is taking place in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, and he will be represented solely with the head of division, Democracy, Governance and Elections, Mr. Mbari Calix. Mr. Mbari, you have the floor, please.
Merci, Salah. Chers mesdames et messieurs les membres ou les représentants des organes de l'Union africaine, mesdames et messieurs les représentants des communautés économiques et régionales, mesdames et messieurs représentant les ambassades des États membres de notre organisation continentale, mesdames et messieurs les représentants des organisations internationales ou partenaires, mesdames et messieurs les représentants du secteur privé, mesdames et messieurs les représentants de la société civile, chers amis, chers comrades, mesdames et messieurs les instituts de recherche, mesdames et messieurs, laissez-moi tout simplement dire tout protocole dûment observé. Je prends la parole au nom de Dr Rabelais Matlosa, qui aurait logiquement dû s'adresser à vous en cette circonstance, mais comme l'a dit le modérateur, il se trouve sur un autre chantier, celui de la démocratie, à travers l'appui au processus électoral en Tanzanie. Je prends donc cette parole au nom de la Commission aux affaires politiques qu'il devrait représenter pour vous remercier. Vous remercier tous d'avoir pris du temps, d'avoir pris sur votre temps pour être là et participer à ce 4e forum sur la justice transitionnelle en Afrique. Le thème de notre forum pour cette année 2020, qui porte sur l'état de la justice transitionnelle en Afrique, faire taire les armes dans le contexte de la COVID-19, progrès, problèmes et perspectives, revêt une signification toute particulière. En effet, le nombre de plus en plus croissant des foyers de tension et des conflits internes violents dans nos États membres nous rappelle la justesse et la pertinence de de la décision des chefs d'État et de gouvernement de l'Union africaine de déclarer cette année de faire taire les armes. Ce contexte, comme vous le savez, est davantage exacerbé par la pandémie de Covid-19 qui a mis à mal toutes nos planifications, toutes nos réalisations et qui continue d'affecter nos vies au quotidien et bien évidemment nos efforts en ce qui concerne la mise en place des programmes de justice transitionnelle. Ce contexte nous place au cœur des préoccupations d'une justice transitionnelle dont la finalité est d'assurer pour les individus, pour les peuples et pour les États un environnement paisible, libéré de tout conflit, de division, de violation des droits de l'homme. La justice transitionnelle est pour nous une nécessité, un mécanisme permettant aux États de panser leurs plaies, de corriger les injustices et ses causes profondes, de promouvoir l'état de droit pour plus de justice, d'équité et d'égalité. C'est pourquoi nous devons tous être engagés et travailler à la mise en place des programmes cohérents et justes pour corriger les causes des conflits qui exigent que nous mettions en place un programme de justice transitionnelle. Un programme de justice transitionnelle qui prenne en compte des dimensions qui ont été largement présentées par les intervenants et qui touchent des questions essentielles comme l'appui psychologique apporté aux victimes, la dimension des initiatives régionales dont il est nécessaire de prendre en compte lorsque nous mettons en place ces programmes, le besoin de promouvoir notre politique ainsi que son cadre de mise en œuvre pour une bonne appropriation, une meilleure appropriation par les États, la question du financement des programmes de justice transitionnelle et de mobilisation de ressources, mais également plus important, la question de l'engagement des uns et des autres pour la réalisation de cet objectif. Cela est de notre responsabilité, même si nous sommes convaincus que les États ont un rôle déterminant à jouer pour assurer l'effectivité et la bonne réalisation de ces programmes. Je voudrais remercier tous les panélistes pour leurs interventions qui ont été d'une très grande facture et qui nous ont aidés à bien mener ces échanges. Je voudrais remercier également tous ceux et celles qui ont pris de leur temps pour participer à ce forum et dont la contribution ont permis de faire en sorte que nous puissions réussir ce pari qui nous oblige aujourd'hui à travailler non pas en présentiel, mais à travers les vidéoconférences. Nous pouvons dire à ce stade que ce forum, comme ceux qui l'ont précédé, aura été un succès, et ça grâce à vous. Et c'est pour cela, je voudrais, pour terminer, au nom de la commissaire aux affaires politiques et du directeur des affaires politiques, Dr Rabelais Matlosa, vous remercier pour votre engagement et vous prier de toujours garder cette flamme pour que tous ensemble, nous puissions nous engager résolument à faire de la justice transitionnelle une réalité et surtout un succès sur notre continent. Sur ce, je vous remercie et je déclare close notre session, le 4e forum de la justice transitionnelle en Afrique, et je vous remercie.